We're seeing a price pullback ahead of tomorrow's Fed response, but let's hold on that for a minute because the big story with gold lately has been this current rally, and that current rally driven by central bank buying. That behavior might actually be affecting what you're doing personally because it has a lot to do with gold's continued relevance going forward. Well, what about central bank selling? Outside of Canada, at least, what do we really know? So my wife sent me an article covering a theory on gold's price spike. Strange world when your wife is texting you stories about gold. Anyway, the article, it pointed out a lot of the things we've talked about here, how the data that might be feeding Fed policy decisions don't seem to be driving gold price direction, at least not like we would expect them to. And the theory comes from billionaire investor David Einhorn, so it makes for a good headline. Billionaire is involved. Well, this idea has to do with central bank purchasing. Before we get back to it, if you're looking for gold and silver, hit up SD Bullion. New customers can even get gold and silver for spot. That's sdbullion.com/new. So we've talked about Eastern Central Bank buying having a significant impact on gold price. Significant, but also hard to specifically identify. So it's really difficult to determine exactly what that impact is. The things that we do know, though, are that central banks have been buying at historic levels, and the People's Bank of China in particular has purchased gold 18 consecutive months. Now, we aren't sure exactly where that gold is coming from. Would Chinese domestic production keep up with that central bank demand? It's hard to say. And that's where this theory comes into play. So David Einhorn, the headline billionaire, he's the founder of Greenlight Capital. He says there's a trend of countries in the East buying gold from countries in the West, or Western nations. And he suggests that the West is running out of gold that it's willing to sell, so the Eastern demand is pushing prices higher. So that adds a layer to everything that we've been talking about. We haven't really gone into where this gold is coming from, and we haven't gone into what the non-Eastern nations have been willing to part with. Now, the reason that I find that interesting is that I'm not particularly aligned with the strategies of Eastern nations. You could say if central banks are buying gold, maybe they know something. Maybe we should be buying this stuff too. But if it's just one block of nations doing that buying, they might know something that really doesn't apply to the rest of us. It's hard to say. Now, sure, it is an alternative to holding US dollar reserves, particularly with China, it seems. And you could say that having a hedge against US dollar strength is good for most of us. You don't have to be China, but maybe there's more to it. Important part here, though, is that what we don't see is Western nations selling their gold reserves down. So looking into this a little bit further, what we can see is that the global net demand for gold by central banks has been more than 1,000 tons for the past 2 years. Now, total global gold production for 2023 was more than 3,000 metric tons. Again, compare that to 1,000. China produced 370 of those. Again, we're talking metric tons. And the Chinese government bought 225 metric tons of gold in 2023. Okay, so that means global gold production during these big 2 years of central bank buying has outpaced purchases 3-1. Western nations haven't had to sell to allow Eastern nations to purchase. In China specifically, well, they produce more gold than the central bank purchases. So again, I'm not sure if David Einhorn's theory is correct. Now, between the two of us, he's the only billionaire, but I'm not sure Eastern nations have run out of willing sellers. The idea that carries through, though, here is that Western nations aren't selling it. And we can confirm that using figures from the IMF, the World Gold Council. Germany sold a few tons. They're the only Western country that stands out having any real net sale. So while there's been a lot of talk about this gold purchasing being done in anticipation of some kind of move away from the dollar, and really only being done by Eastern nations, it's interesting to look at the top 4 nations for gold holdings according to the World Gold Council. Familiar, it's the United States, Germany, Italy, and France. So this isn't just something that Eastern nations are doing to leave the Western nations behind. So this is one of those topics that can quickly get political or even conspiratorial. I'm not getting into any of that. What I'm saying here is that if you think it's worth paying attention to central bank buying as some kind of validation on what you're doing on a personal level, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it tells us something about the continued relevance for gold going forward. But I would also say that it makes sense to look to see if other central banks are selling, in particular those central banks that are a little closer to where you live. And except for a few edge cases, they aren't. So I think that that also tells us every bit as much as the Eastern nations buying. Okay, so let's call it good there. Let us know what you think. And if you're watching this prior to May 16th, 2024, add the word rooster to your comment if you'd like to be entered into a drawing for some gold. The description has details. There's a post telling you what to do. There's a page with all of the rules and disclaimers. So be sure to check it out. Who wouldn't want some free gold? And then, of course, while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you want to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.